When we think of nihilism, we don't usually think of mainstream religions. Nihilists believe in nothing, after all.
He believes in nothing.
He believes in nothing, Lebowski, nothing.
Religions believe in all sorts of crazy shit. Virgin births, zombie gods, space gods on suicide missions, something about a galactic federation,
Evil Lord Xenu. Xenu thought his galaxy was over. Frozen alien bodies were loaded onto Xenu's galactic cruisers.
and whatever the fuck this means. Certainly these beliefs exist, right? They have to. How else could they inspire such passion and seem to have the staying power of many millennia? All beliefs have meaning and therefore can inspire and persevere. But as we've discussed in previous videos, even things which don't exist can have meaning. Religious people aren't believing in nothing, or at least they don't believe they are believing in nothing. The religious ideas transcend the physical and temporary. Their meaning, allegedly, escapes what we ourselves can never escape: death. Belief in such ideas have a tranquilizing effect.
Aye! Yes! Oh, it's like getting sucked off by an angel. A sweet angel with a tranquilizer.
They numb their believers from the dangers and suffering of the world which we experience through our senses with our physical bodies. Religion is the opiate of the masses, says some old German. Despite having meaning, belief in such ideas means one is willing towards something which is not, towards a nothing. The word nihilism comes from the Latin nihil, the nothing. Arguably the best thinker on nihilism was another old German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche, a miserably cantankerous individual whose life was burdened by excruciating stomach and migraine pain, and who died in a madhouse unable to feed himself, said that there were many different stages to nihilism, but all of them relied on a willing towards nothing. Friedrich famously declared the death of God, which is the realization that all values that we believe to be eternal, true, good, beautiful, divine, necessary, and so on and so forth, are none of these things. God doesn't exist, and neither do all the truths and morality that came with him. All of these things are merely our creation, and are therefore contingent, transitory, and can be easily overthrown. This realization has a profound effect on a person, oftentimes a deep pessimism or existential crisis. Nothing matters. But this realization points towards a deeper and darker realization that these allegedly objective, eternal, true values have always been nothing. For Nietzsche, practical nihilism refers to the religious doctrines which dominated Western Europe for nearly 2,000 years, mainly Christianity. Yet, Nietzsche doesn't stop there, but also refers to the philosophical schools of thought descending from Socrates and Plato, and even modernity itself to a certain extent. Obviously, the tradition of the West doesn't believe it's willing towards nothingness. It fervently, without reservation, believes these values: God, the forms, a pure world, a world which is realer than this world of mere appearances. This nihilism is practical because it is performed through action, not reflection. The practical precedes what we will later call theoretical nihilism, which will be talked about in a later video. Practical nihilism is a willing towards nothingness, but a nothingness that is still rich with meaning, because even a willing towards nothing creates values. Friedrich says, quote, "It is the profound, suspicious fear of an incurable pessimism that forces whole millennia to bury their teeth in and cling to a religious interpretation of existence." These values, which supposedly transcend and seem above us, are nihilistic because they are profoundly anti-life. And being anti-life is the greatest burden of nihilism for Friedrich, because all willing towards nothingness is anti-life. This is because the most fundamental aspect of life for Friedrich is the will to power, Wille zur Macht. Quote, "Only where there is life is there also will. Not will to life, but, thus I teach you, will to power." What does this mean? The will is not a will to life because will and life are synonymous for Nietzsche. Anything that doesn't will is not alive. At the same time, all willing is towards something beyond itself, something which is more than itself. In willing, power is discharged in order to push forward, and more power is needed. Once a will has achieved power, it then automatically seeks more power. The will's only principle is willing in order to will more. Will to power means the will to will more, to surpass itself, because failing to do so means death. At the same time, to live is to evaluate, to create values. Nietzsche says, quote, "Behind all logic and its seeming sovereignty of movement, too, there stands valuations, or more clearly, physiological demands for the preservation of a certain type of life. The will evaluates the power it achieves in order to determine how to overcome itself. According to philosopher Peter Hughes, quote, "To have no values is to be dead. For example, perception itself is valuation. The human color spectrum is valuable to us evolutionarily in order to gain power. Humanity creates values, exalts them, reifies them, and, if need be, discards them when they are no longer useful. Values preserve and enhance humanity as a species." Yet the values of practical nihilism negate life, react with hostility towards a world in which it suffers, seeks an escape from life, and is in fact resentful of life. These nihilistic values are produced by a willing against the real, the world, towards a nothing, a willing towards nothingness. How is it that the will could will towards nothingness? Because a, quote, "basic fact of the human will, it needs a goal, and it would rather will nothingness than not will." Friedrich calls religious values ascetic ideals, for the ascetic is the one who starves themselves of any sensation. Once these ascetic ideals are cemented in civilization, once they become the true, the pure, the transcendent ideals, then all other forms of willing, all other values are crushed, snuffed out for the one, the same, the only true value. Do not despair, everything is not meaningless. There is a purpose, a goal, a reason for our existence. Just deny life. Deny this imperfect, apparent world, and the promised real world is eternally waiting. We'll look at 3 examples of practical nihilism, not necessarily in this order: the philosophy of Socrates and Plato, Christianity, and modernity. The words of Friedrich, quote, "Christianity has taken the side of everything weak, base, ill-constituted. It has made an ideal out of opposition to the preservative instincts of strong life. It has depraved the reason even of the intellectually strongest natures by teaching men to feel the supreme values of intellectuality as sin, as misleading, as temptation." Christianity. The belief in a space god who sent his only begotten son, which is actually just him in disguise, on a suicide mission to save the souls of humanity. But he's a god, but he's also like a single dad, a single parent, he's got a lot going on. And in order to save your soul, he needs you to cannibalize his body and blood. Christianity. The belief in an infinite, eternal, and perfect being, of which we are mere temporary images of, sinful images of. Christianity teaches us that pride, lust, gluttony, greed, wrath, and so on, these most natural of instincts born out of a sensuous body in the world, are actually evil. They are sins of the flesh, impure compared to the divine nature of God. The Christian God taught humanity to oppose these evils with its own goods: pity, celibacy, poverty, weakness, abstinence. These are the ascetic ideals of Christianity. Deny your senses, for they are evil. Deny this world, for it is imperfect and fleeting. Bound yourselves to these ascetic ideals, For these are the keys to heaven, the eternal, the afterlife, divine peace, truth, everything this world is not. Friedrich says, quote, "The Church fights passion with excision in every sense. Its practice, its cure, is castratism. It never asks, how can one spiritualize, beautify, deify a craving? It has at all times laid the stress of discipline on extirpation of sensuality, of pride, of the lust to rule, of avarice, of vengefulness." But an attack on the roots of passions means an attack on the roots of life. The practice of the Church is hostile to life. Christianity gave the West an absolute value, despite humanity's smallness and puny mortality. Friedrich says Christians are resentful of life, ressentiment. The early monotheists, Judaism and Christianity, resented the morality of the noble Romans, what Friedrich called master morality. What the Romans called good, strength, power, conquest, proficiency, the Christians called evil. Meanwhile, what the Romans called bad, weakness, resentment, pity, poverty, etc., the Christians called good. Nietzsche calls moralities of resentment slave morality. Yet, even if of a lower caste or a slave, how could one view weakness as an inherent good? Friedrich says, quote, "The ascetic ideal means that something was lacking, that an enormous void surrounded man. He did not know how to justify himself, to explain, to affirm himself. He suffered from the problem of his meaning." Master morality left the slaves, serfs, and peasants with a lack of meaning or purpose. What was their life even worth? What does their suffering mean? Yet even slaves, serfs, and peasants must create values. So they follow the ascetic priests. The ascetic priest does not seek to react against suffering, overcome suffering, nor does he seek to even abolish it. Friedrich concludes, quote, "He wants it. He even seeks it out, provided one shows him a meaning for it, a to this end of suffering. The meaninglessness of suffering in itself was the curse that thus far lay stretched out over humanity, and the ascetic ideal offered it a meaning. Any meaning is better than no meaning, and humans will suffer willingly as long as they have a purpose, even if that purpose is ultimately nothing." The words of Friedrich, quote, "All the concepts of the Church are recognized for what they are, the most malicious false coinage there is for the purpose of devaluing nature and natural values. The priest himself is recognized for what he is, the most dangerous form of parasite, the actual poison spider of life. The concepts beyond, less judgment, immortality of the soul, and the soul itself, they are the instruments of torture. They are forms of systematic cruelty by virtue of which the priest has become master, stays master." Again, the words of Friedrich, quote, "In every age, the wisest have passed the identical judgment on life. It is worthless." Socrates and Plato. These ancient Greek philosophers' influence on Western civilization cannot be understated. 20th century philosopher Alfred Whitehead once famously stated, and I'm paraphrasing, that all of European civilization is but a series of footnotes to the ideas of the Socratic method and Platonic forms, and the monotheistic omnigod of Christianity and Islam is grounded in the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle. According to Plato, Socrates' dying words were, quote, "Credo, I owe a cock to Asclepius. Will you remember to pay the debt?" Asclepius was the Greek god of medicine. One repaid the debt of being healed from a sickness by providing an offering to him. Friedrich interprets this as to live. That means to be a long time sick. I owe a cock to the savior, Asclepius. Even Socrates had had enough of life. For the Greeks, to be sick was to lack health, to be deficient in health. Socrates was not forced to drink hemlock and die for his crimes against Athens. He was originally sentenced to exile, but chose death instead. In drinking hemlock, Socrates thanks Asclepius for curing him of the sickness of life. For Nietzsche, Socrates is the OG nihilist. Socrates affirmed a tradition of static death. Socrates' pupil, Plato, applied Socratic nihilism to his metaphysics, epistemology, and morality. The world we are trapped in, the world of becoming, perishing, dark, darkness, the world that is a mere cave, that is a paltry shadow of the true world, what does it mean to truly be? The ancient Greek word for being is ousia, which means to be present. All entities, rocks, cats, people, schnallagasters, share one thing in common. They are all present, and in being present they endure the ravages of time. For Plato, a being which ceases to be is a wimpy being, not a hefty being. Plato knew that the perfect being, the perfect form of presence, would be a presence that is eternally present and never ceases to be present. Plato espoused the theory of forms, or the eternally existing essences for all things, of which our world is a mere puny reflection of. Plato's forms exist so far above that even the mighty gods of Mount Olympus must fly upwards to feast. Plato says, quote,
"The place beyond heaven. None of our earthly poets has ever sung or will ever sing its praises enough. Still, this is the way it is. Risky as it may be, you see, I must attempt to speak the truth, especially since the truth is my subject. What is in this place is without color, without shape, and without solidity. A being that really is what it is, the subject of all true knowledge, visible only to intelligence, the soul's steersman. Now, a god's mind is nourished by intelligence and pure knowledge, as is the mind of any soul who is concerned to take in what is appropriate to it, and so it is delighted at last to be seeing what is real and watching what is true, feeding on all this and feeling wonderful, until the circular motion brings it around to where it started. On the way around, it has a view of justice as it is. It has a view of self-control. It has a view of knowledge, not the knowledge that is close to change, that becomes different as it knows the different things which we consider real down here. No, it is the knowledge of what really is what it is. And when the soul has seen all the things that are as they are and feasted on them, it sinks back inside heaven and goes home.
There's a perfect form for everything. The form of darkness, form of motion, form of rest, form of Plato, perfect form of Hitler, seemingly ad infinitum. Most importantly, there is also a perfect form of good.
Okay, but the perfect is the enemy of the good.
Here we see the beginnings of a mighty fallacy, where what is natural is at the same time considered to be inherently good.
The Christian God later absorbed Platonic philosophy into itself, becoming the self-caused first cause, the infinite and eternal, the perfect being. As we stated earlier, Christianity also saw the world of appearances and the flesh as a sickness, sin, that had to be abstained from for Judgment Day, where the kingdom of heaven, or actual reality, awaits. The Platonic tradition still continues to this day. René Descartes continued the supremacy of the supersensory world with the mind-body dualism, distinguishing the sensual, res extensa, the extensive physical thing, from res cogitans, a thinking or spiritual thing. For Descartes, it was our senses which revealed the physical world to us. At the same time, our senses were the very thing which we should be most in doubt about. It was reason, which sprung from our mind or soul, that gave us the most certain and distinct knowledge. With Hegel, we have the absolute, or the sum of all being actual and potential. Hegel privileges the ideal, the concept, above the material. Hegel says in Science of Logic, quote, "Only the absolute idea of being, imperishable life, self-knowing truth, and it is all truth." Everywhere we see the privileging of the supersensory over the sensuous. In our nihilistic tradition, philosophers have continued to create a world, instead of allowing nature to create, somehow separate and more perfect than the real world. Nietzsche vehemently rejects this thought, that man and his concepts are somehow the same as they were in the beginning. Quote, "Everything has evolved. There are no eternal facts, as there are likewise no absolute truths." Everywhere all we really see is the shadows of Plato's forms. Humans are rational animals, but animals whose bodies are very sickly and deformed. From Plato to Hegel, a villain towards nothingness, the supersensory that depreciates the sensory. The entire world historical movement of metaphysics, literally meaning beyond the physical, has dominated Western society. Therefore, according to Friedrich, all of philosophy since Plato has been nihilistic. The words of Friedrich: "You ask me about the idiosyncrasies of philosophers, their hatred of even the idea of becoming, death, change, age, as well as procreation and growth offer them objections, refutations even. What is does not become. What becomes is not. Be a philosopher, be a mummy, represent monotheism by a grave digger mimicry, and away above all with the body, that pitiable idea fixa of the senses. Infected with every error of logic there is, refuted, impossible even. Notwithstanding, it is impudent enough to behave as if it actually existed. The words of Martin. Nihilism is the world historical movement of the peoples of the earth who have been drawn into the power realm of the modern era. From Plato to Christianity, we see an anthropomorphizing of the world. This is because philosophy has applied human values to nature. Anthropomorphic means ascribing human form or attributes to a being or thing not human. The word is itself contradictory, as it assumes there is such a form that applies to all humans. For Plato, the form of being is ultimately subservient to the form of the good, just as the shining of the sun is not itself sight, but is in fact the cause of all sight, or the realm where visibility is possible. The form of good is the realm of intelligibility. The monotheistic deity is the summum bonum, the ultimate good, meaning all of God's creations are created by that which is the greatest good. Everywhere we see the problem of the is-ought distinction first discovered by Scottish Enlightenment philosopher David Hume, which we discussed in this short here. What is not the same as what ought to be, and never the twain shall meet. Is statements are descriptive. They describe facts. Ought statements are prescriptive. They prescribe values to things. Values like good and bad are human inventions, and it is ultimately silly to say that what is natural is good or what is good is natural. This is a mere anthropomorphizing of nature. In anthropomorphizing nature, we will towards a mythical, eternal form of humanity. We will towards nothingness. Friedrich says, quote, "We have only created the world which is of any account to man." Even modernity still believed in an objective truth, objective morality, natural laws, a telos or purpose or design to the world. Friedrich analyzes the origins of these concepts and finds they all originate in the Christian monotheistic God, which itself can be traced back to the Platonic forms. Nietzsche describes these concepts as, quote, "the highest concepts, that is to say the most general, the emptiest concept, the last fumes of evaporating reality." As deism and atheism became increasingly popular in the 18th century, the eternal truths of logic, the concept of a grand design or purposed civilization, the idea of humanity as an end unto itself, objective morality through the truth of reason, continued to stink up Western philosophy. Nietzsche's Madman asked if, after the death of God, we cannot smell the rotting corpse of God.
Do we not smell the divine putrefaction, or even God's putrefy?
Because all that was grounded in the transcendental concept continues in Western thought. The Madman asks if we ourselves will not have to become gods or ends unto ourselves. No one represents this shift better than 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant. In Kant's magnum opus, The Critique of Pure Reason, Kant seeks to ground all of metaphysics, knowledge, and morality within the limits of human reason. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia, quote, "Kant's main goal is to show that a critique of reason by reason itself, unaided and unrestrained by traditional authorities, establishes a secure and consistent basis for both Newtonian science and traditional morality and religion. So, reason deserves the sovereignty attributed to it by the Enlightenment. Each individual human, their own reason was the limit that showed the universal limits of reality." Kant denied that we could have any knowledge of metaphysics beyond our senses, yet the senses still remain imperfect, essentially flawed and prone to error. In order to solve this problem, Kant says that both our senses and our understanding have certain a priori givens. Intuition was governed by the a priori forms of space and time, while the understanding was governed by the a priori categories of quantity, quality, relation, and modality. Kant was attempting to ground the scientific method, especially the science of Newtonian physics, in eternal and a priori structures. We cannot understand anything beyond our a posteriori senses, but the sensuous world still relies on a priori structures. Unsurprisingly, Friedrich doesn't have a high opinion of these allegedly a priori structures. Quote, Faith in the categories of reason is the cause of nihilism. We have measured the value of the world according to categories that refer to a purely fictitious world. This still remains nihilistic, as it preserves the values inherited from Christianity, and does nothing to create values that enhance and affirm existence. These a priori categories are only human concepts. Kant's categories are born out of an intense need for something beyond experience, prior to it. Only someone who is wary of the world could conceive of such things. The words of Friedrich: "Some have still need of metaphysics, but also the impatient longing for certainty, which at present discharges itself in scientific positivist fashion among large numbers of the people. The longing by all means to get at something stable, while on account of the warmth of the longing the establishing of the certainty is more leisurely and negligently undertaken. Even this is still longing for a hold, a support. In short, the instinct of weakness." Which, while not actually creating religions, metaphysics, and convictions of all kinds, nevertheless preserves them. In fact, around all these positivist systems, there fume the vapors of a certain pessimistic gloom, something of a weariness, fatalism, disillusionment, and a fear of new disillusionment. Modernity's continued reliance on eternal a priori concepts is a continuation of practical nihilism, but modernity goes farther than any Platonism and Christianity and helps to inaugurate what Nietzsche calls, quote, "a higher history than any history hitherto." Kant still splits the world into a sensuous and supersensuous. There are phenomena, the appearances of things acquired by our senses and categorized by our understanding, and the noumena, the thing in itself that is the true objective actuality of a thing which we have no access to. The wise philosopher king and his Platonic love with teenage boys could view the eternal forms of Plato. Heaven was attainable to those that followed the ascetic ideals of Christianity. But with modernity, the horror of horrors is realized. The actual world, the real, is forever beyond our grasp. Even the empty promise of an afterlife has been taken away. We are forever trapped in the apparent world. But after over 2,500 years of degrading the sensual for the spiritual, it is a world which cannot bear the burden of objectivity. So what is the point, then, of anything? Is there a point? Or is it all nihil, nothing? Next time, we'll look at this higher form of nihilism to answer the question, why do I even get out of bed?
The Madman.
Have you ever heard of the madman who on a bright morning lit a lantern and ran to the marketplace, calling out unceasingly,
"I seek God! I seek God!"
As there were many people standing about who did not believe in God, he caused a great deal of amusement.
Ooh, what? Is he lost?
Said the one.
Has he strayed away like a child?
Said another.
Ooh, does he keep himself hidden? Is he afraid of us? Is he taking a sea voyage? Is he immigrated? Ooh.
The people cried out laughingly, all in a hubbub. The insane man jumped into their midst and transfixed them with his glances.
Where's God gone? Anyone seen him? Hello? Go out for a bit?
He called out.
I mean to tell you, we have killed him, you and I. We are all his murderers. But how have we done it? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the whole horizon? What did we do when we loosened this earth from its sun? Whither does it now move? Whither do we move? Away from our old suns? Do we not dash on unceasingly backwards, sideways, forwards, in all directions? Is there still an above and a below? Do we not stray as through infinite nothingness? Does not empty space breathe upon us? Has it not become colder? Does not night come on continually, darker and darker? Shall we not have to light lanterns in the morning? Do we not hear the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we not smell the divine putrefaction? Or even God's putrefy? God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we console ourselves, the most murderous of all murderers, the holiest and the mightiest that the world has hitherto possessed,
Has bled to death under our knife.
who will wipe the blood from us? With what water could we cleanse ourselves? What lust? What sacred game shall we have to devise? Is not the magnitude of this deed too great for us? Shall we not ourselves have to become gods, merely to seem worthy of it? There never was a greater event, and on account of it, all who are born after us belong to a higher history than any history hitherto.
Here, the madman was silent and looked again at his hearers. They also were silent and looked at him in surprise. At last, he threw his lantern on the ground so that it broke in pieces and was extinguished.
I come too early. I am not yet at the right time.
This prodigious event is still on its way and is traveling.
It has not yet reached men's ears. Lightning and thunder need time. The light of the stars needs time. Deeds need time.
Even after they're done, to be seen and heard.
This deed is as yet further from them than the furthest star, and yet they have done it!
It's done. You did it.
It is further stated that the madman made his way into different churches on the same day, and there intoned his requiem aeternam Deo. When led out and called to account, he always gave the reply.
What are these churches now, if not the tombs and monument of God? Amen.
These are the words of German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche in his 1882 work, The Gay Science. In Aphorism 125, Nietzsche has a madman say these words. But what could a madman know? What is he trying to tell us through rambunctious ramblings? Obviously, the belief in a god is still alive, both during Nietzsche's time and today. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the three primary monotheistic religions of the West, continue to exist with literally billions of adherents. So how exactly could God not only be dead, but also a murder victim? This all depends on what one means by God. The monotheistic God of Christianity and Islam is the uncreated creator, the unmoved first mover. This God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent. An omni-God. God is not just the ultimate cause, but also the ultimate goal.
Let's just say he gets around.
He is the ens perfectum, the ultimate good. So one's distance from God correlates to their own individual goodness, or lack thereof. God is the ultimate value, from which all other values spring from. And unlike those pesky, contingent, worldly values, God's values are eternally true, aeternitas veritas. God is the nunc stans, the abiding and remaining, that can always be referred to, or used as the ground for deeds and thoughts.
So if God is this freaking amazing, how could he be murdered? By mere mortals at that.
Nietzsche himself was an avowed atheist, only increasing the confusion of stating a deity you don't believe in is dead. For Nietzsche, the death of the Christian omnigod marks the creation of a new type of nihilism, or a villing towards nothingness. This is a villing towards the nihil, the nothing, a type of villing and believing which is profoundly anti-life.
Nihilism is anti-life because it doesn't affirm life. And the most fundamental aspect of life for Nietzsche is the will to power, Wille zur Macht.
In his book, Thus Spake Zarathustra, Zarathustra says, quote,
Only where there is life is there also will.
not will to life, but
Thus I teach you, will to power, power, power.
Nihilism perpetrates an end for humanity, either in this life or another. There's nothing left to do, nothing else to create. There is only a reactive, sullen life to live. This is the antithesis of the will to power. The will to power always wants more to will, to surpass itself continuously. If something does not will, it's not alive. And it's this resistance to not willing that makes nihilism possible. For the will would rather will nothing than not will at all.
To be clear, Nietzsche isn't advocating the reincarnation of God as the supreme value.
Been there, done that.
Christianity teaches us to suppress our inner desires, the impure material world, in favor of an eternally divine afterlife.
One which we have no access to while alive, and therefore cannot prove its existence.
Christianity is just a different form of nihilism, where believers veil their existence towards a nothingness. God, the afterlife, values above and beyond life.
Religion devalues life, depreciates life, in the name of higher values. The nihilism that comes from religion is specifically to prevent the type of nihilism that comes from modernity.
Quote, "It is the profound, suspicious fear of an incurable pessimism that forces whole millennia to bury their teeth in and cling to a religious interpretation of existence."
Now that God is dead, the madman says,
"Those who are born after belong to a higher history than any history hitherto."
It's worth noting that the madman's audience is not a crowd of religious zealots, but mainly a crowd of atheists and non-believers. Nietzsche says, quote, "As there were many people who did not believe in God, the madman caused a great deal of amusement."
These people long ago forsook God, whether by conquering the circumference of the planet or detaching the sun and earth from the center of the universe. The madman is addressing modernity, the Enlightenment. It is for this reason that the madman's listeners laugh at him and express confusion.
The God referred to is not an entity of any kind, described above as an omnigod, not an actual being, but is precisely a value created by humanity. God was the ultimate omni-value that was both the alpha, means, and omega, ends of all things.
The madman states that even though this deed is done, it has yet, quote, reached men's ears. Deeds need time, even after they are done, to be seen and heard. This deed is as yet further from them than the furthest star, and yet they have done it!
We should point out that many of the primary figures of the early Enlightenment were all deeply religious and strongly believed in God. Thinkers like Francis Bacon, Isaac Newton, René Descartes, John Locke, Bishop George Berkeley, Gottfried Leibniz, etc., all thought their discoveries were ultimately created by an omnigod, and they were using a methodology given to them by God specifically to understand his universe.
Yet their methodology was a seismic shift away from Catholic scholasticism of the medieval period, where the authority and existence of God was proven merely on belief and obedience. With thinkers like Bacon and Descartes, proof of God's value could be proven by any individual, through reason and intuition alone, through one's own faculties. The latter, Descartes, relied on the authority of the intellect, while the former, Bacon, relied on the authority of the senses. Either way, the world is knowable. Its mysteries can be discovered. We no longer need to rely on church dogma to explain the unknown. We now have our own lanterns to light the way.
Yet, by the 18th and 19th century, this critical methodology had led many Enlightenment figures to increasingly secular philosophies like deism, the belief in an uncaring and or uninvolved deity, thinkers like Voltaire, Diderot, and many of the American founding fathers, or just straight-up atheism, the belief there is no deity, thinkers like David Hume, Arthur Schopenhauer, and of course, Nietzsche.
It is the deists that describe God as a mere first cause, or as Nietzsche describes, as the thinnest, emptiest concept, a mere causis sua, perpetrated as ens realissimum. The atheists, on the other hand, have already stabbed God right in his genitals.
Despite earlier thinkers' attempts to light lanterns, to reveal the hidden knowledge of God, acts like, quote,
"Detach the earth from the sun, drink up the sea, wipe away the fall of right,"
undermine the value of God as the ultimate value. It's these deists, and more importantly the atheists, that the madman addresses. What happens when, quote, the holiest and the mightiest that the world has hitherto possessed is no longer the foundation for existence, knowledge, society?
For Friedrich, the death of God is the realization that there are no transcendent values. To be transcended means to be beyond our grasp. That which is transcendent is above us in authority, and it is eternally true. When we talk about ideals, our goal is some transcendent value that we strive for, despite it being, by definition, beyond us.
But without transcendent values, we get the feeling that nothing means anything, and therefore everything is the same.
Is there still an above and a below?
The Madman asks.
Nietzsche says it more directly in his book Twilight of the Idols. What alone can our teaching be? That no one gives a human being his qualities. Not God, not society, not his parents or ancestors, not he himself. No one is accountable for existing at all, or for being constituted as he is, or for living in the circumstances and surroundings in which he lives. The fatality of his nature cannot be disentangled from the fatality of all that which has been and will be. He is not the result of a specific design, a will, a purpose. He is not the subject of an attempt to attain an ideal of man, or an ideal of happiness, or an ideal of morality. It is absurd to want to hand over his nature to some purpose or other. We invented the concept purpose. In reality, purpose is lacking.
Basically, there is nothing out there that gives a fuck. We created the concept purpose, and because we applied it to God, a being for the purposes of this video we'll all assume doesn't exist, we find the concept of purpose lacking. And with the death of God, this lack of purpose is all the more blatant. The Madman questions whether the world has become colder, darker, more empty after God's death. Humanity, which clung so hard to this greatest conception of God, now plunges continuously in all directions as if straying through infinite nothingness.
With the death of God comes the death of Christian morality and the values it gave to life. Now, humanity has lost all values it once clung to. Nietzsche says in the book Beyond Good and Evil, quote, "Didn't one have to sacrifice God himself, and, from cruelty against oneself, worship the stone, stupidity, gravity, fate, the nothing? To sacrifice God for nothing?" All values have lost meaning and seem to point us towards nothing. There is no objective morality, no good or evil.
If all values are equal to nothing, if there is perfect equality in society, like so many humanists and socialists seem to desire, then there is nothing to overcome. Nietzsche calls this a modern form of nihilism, or theoretical nihilism. The death of God is the death of the highest concept, the transcendental concept. The Madman asks, quote,
Shall we not ourselves have to become gods, merely to seem worthy of it?
When humans become God, they attempt to become the transcendental ground for the world. What then happens? Humanity becomes an end unto itself.
Here Nietzsche points his hammer at thinkers like Descartes and Kant that prioritize the metaphysics of a transcendental, whole, complete ego. The ego of the subject became the primary metaphysical principle and lens through which true knowledge is discovered. At the same time, 18th and 19th century thinkers increasingly saw their era as the pinnacle of human history. We're here at the final and perfect conclusion. There's nothing left to do. For instance, before the discoveries of Albert Einstein and quantum mechanics, many physicists believed there was nothing left to learn besides increasingly accurate and precise measurements.
With this thought, everything must spring from humanity.
This is the ultimate consequence of modernity and nihilism. Much like with equality, if humanity is an end, there is nothing to overcome. Humanity then imagines the world as a living being, a machine, or uniform everywhere. Descartes believed all living things were essentially machines, even our own bodies that were separated from our egos. Finally, thinkers like Kant, Hegel, and Marx all believed that there was a teleology or purpose to the world. They postulated meta-narratives on the end goals of human civilization. Nietzsche warns us to be on our guard from such thoughts, because they presuppose an end, a telos, a grand design or meta-narrative, which again prevents overcoming. Despite the good and godly intentions of the early figures of modernity, in murdering God and all other worlds, we were left with just the world of appearances, which we exist in. But after over 2,500 years of degrading the sensual for the spiritual, from Plato to Christianity to the modernity with the rationalists and idealists, it is just a world of mere appearances.
We can never truly be sure of anything, for there is no objective truth. The death of transcendent values leaves us with no North Star, to the point the madman wonders if we should even use the lanterns given to us by modernity. Shall we not have to light lanterns in the morning? These lanterns don't reveal anything anymore. They only reveal nothing. The madman ultimately throws his own lantern to the ground, extinguishing it. The madman asks us if we cannot smell the putrefaction of the divine corpse, for even gods putrefy.
Despite being dead, the stench of God lingers evermore. Modernity is the will to the thinkability of all beings. In the absence of God, modernity still maintains the necessities grounded in a deity through the creation of, quote-unquote, natural laws, natural order, belief in intelligent design, objective morality, and so on.
Like the biblical Adam of Genesis, who names all of God's creations, 18th century biologist Carl Linnaeus conquered the names of all animals through his taxonomic net, neatly organizing all life into its proper place. Linnaeus also believed that all species of life that currently existed were permanent and remained unchanged since the beginning of time. Kant, who is super fucking racist, was against race mixing because he believed nature had already reached its teleological conclusion with the races separated. Because one could only find different races on different continents with drastically different climates, Kant presupposed that nature had intended a differentiation of the races up to this point.
Nietzsche doesn't believe there is a natural order to the world, that those beliefs are just holdovers from the Christian God that continues to putrefy in modern sciences.
Modernity seeks to bend the world around itself, to create the kind of world which humanity can then kneel to.
The modern person kneels to this world and believes it is an escape from the suffering of life. They are not overcoming life, they are acquiescing to it.
Kant legit admits he can't prove through reason alone that God exists or doesn't exist, but still just throws him into his philosophy just because, cause a sewer.
The nihilism of modernity reduces all of humanity's values and beliefs to nil. Now, humanity equates all things as equally nothing, and does not strive to overcome anything. The words of Nietzsche, quote, "The general character of the world is to all eternity chaos, not by the absence of necessity, but in the sense of absence of order, structure, form, beauty, wisdom, and whatever else our aesthetic humanities are called."
There is a necessity to the cosmos, but it is a chaotic necessity, a necessity of differences that reject order, structure, essences, anything eternal or certain, and so on and so forth. A necessity that necessitates overcoming as the only real goal of existence. Differences must necessarily attempt to overcome themselves. Differences that don't overcome themselves don't exist. Nietzsche says the death of God replaces one nihilism with another. This new form of nihilism is the realization of the necessity of chaos and the deep pessimism that comes with it. It is only here that the theoretical forms of nihilism develop, where people literally believe in nothing.
Yeah, he believes in nothing. He believes in nothing, Laboski, nothing.
And tomorrow we come back and we cut off your Johnson.
Excuse me? I said we cut off your Johnson! Just think about that, Lebowski. Ah, you big little penis, Lebowski. Maybe they stomp on it and squish it.
Man, they were nihilists, man.
Huh?
They kept saying they believed in nothing.
Nihilists. Fuck me.
French philosopher Gilles Deleuze says of modern nihilism that it, quote, is no longer the devaluation of life in the name of higher values, but rather the devaluation of higher values themselves.
With God dead and buried, the good and truth that rested with God is now lost. If the greatest value ever created can be overturned, then all such values can, ad infinitum, all of our successive highest values, the Enlightenment, humanism, utopias, can all be just as easily dispatched. Our values seem fated towards perpetual nothingness.
With all things Nietzsche, a perspectival methodology is necessary to decipher all the meanings behind his words. One of the things that makes Nietzsche such an incredible thinker is his ability to write things polysemically, with multiple meanings.
Let's finish off the earlier quote from Twilight of the Idols, where Nietzsche stresses there is no purpose for us to rely on. He says this not pessimistically as a pessimistic nihilist might, but optimistically.
Quote, "One is necessary. One is a piece of faith. One belongs to the whole. One is in the whole. There exists nothing which could judge, measure, compare, condemn the whole. But nothing exists apart from the whole. That no one is any longer made accountable, that the kind of being manifested cannot be traced back to a causa prima, that the world is a unity neither as sensorium nor as spirit. This alone is a great liberation. Thus alone is the innocence of becoming restored. The concept God has hitherto been the greatest objection to existence. We deny God. In denying God, we deny accountability. Only by doing that do we redeem the world."
Contrary to his contemporaries' beliefs, the death of God is a profoundly liberating experience for Nietzsche. Yes, there are no transcendent values, no eternal truths, but those things prevented man from affirming life and existence. Humanity has the opportunity to create its own value as it sees fit. Specifically values that continuously overcome chaos and therefore affirm life. The Madman says, "I have come too early. I am not yet here at the right time." The realization of the liberation from God, a momentous occasion with the power of thunder and lightning, has still not reached most of humanity's ears. And when it does, Nietzsche hopes that it will be heard by the ears of a free thinker. For Nietzsche, there are actually many deaths of God and gods that he speaks about throughout his work. Nietzsche performs a genealogy of the different types of gods societies have constructed to then bow down to and obey. There are the deaths of many gods, polytheism in general, the death of national gods, like the God of the Old Testament. The Madman speaks of the death of the Christian God, or any omni-monotheistic deity. But the story of the Madman mainly focuses on how the death of God affects society, especially the creation of modern or theoretical nihilism. We can look at the genealogy of theocide in another video, but next time we'll focus on nihilism in all of its forms. Don't forget to subscribe and become a patron on Patreon.
You wake up every morning still tired. You grab some food, but you still end up hungry. You take a shower and scream for 5 minutes in angst at existence. You go to work, for a time only to leave exhausted and return home unsatisfied. You eat. Spend the rest of your night just staring for a while, before going back to sleep. Then you repeat. Repeat this endlessly, till your dying breath. What was the point of any of it? From birth to death? Was it just a blip? Forgotten as if it never mattered? Is there a point? Or is it all nihil? Nothing. Why even get out of bed?
There's no meaning to any of this. Gotta admit, it's completely meaningless. I don't care. There is no meaning. Just things happening. And there are clusters of tetrahedrons moving around together. Here's the thing. It's not our world.
None of this is real?
Nope.
So you're just passing
We don't
through?
matter. We don't matter.
Oh, wow.
There's the good news.
Nihilism is typically defined as a belief in nothing. Depending on a person's flavor of nihilism, nihilists don't believe in objective morality, no good or evil. There is no objective knowledge, no truths, no falsehoods. There is no reason to even exist, because we are all going to be dead in the end. The universe is, and beyond that, nothing. No order, no structure, no design, no purpose. Is it truly all for naught? Nothing matters. But there is an underlying presupposition that is prior to believing in nothing, and that is a willing towards nothingness. Nihilism was first used by German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who used the term to describe the transcendental idealism of Immanuel Kant. According to Jacobi, Kant's philosophy will lead to everything being known, leaving nothing left to believe in, and no mysteries left to search for. Jacobi saw nihilism as leading us towards inaction, where nothing is done. Other nihilists include Russian novelists like Ivan Turgenev, who used the term to describe the disillusionment of the youth towards both progressivism and traditionalism. Arguably the best thinker on nihilism was 19th century German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche, a miserably cantankerous individual whose life was burdened by excruciating stomach and migraine pain, and who died in a madhouse unable to feed himself, said there were different stages to nihilism, but all of them relied on a willing towards nothing. In our previous video, we analyzed how most religions and philosophies are nihilistic because the people who believe them are willing towards nothing. Even modernity didn't escape this phenomena. But modernity also inaugurates a new, higher form of nihilism. Friedrich's proclamation of the death of God is the realization that all values that we believe to be eternal, true, good, beautiful, divine, necessary, and so on and so forth, are none of these things. God doesn't exist, and neither do all the truths and morality that come with him. All of these things are merely our creations, and are therefore contingent, transitory, and can be easily overthrown. This realization has a profound effect on a person, oftentimes a deep pessimism or existential crisis. Nothing matters. The appearance of a new type of nihilism, one which goes beyond a mere willing towards nothingness, occurs with the death of God, first proclaimed by Nietzsche in Aphorism 125, The Madman, in the 1882 book The Gay Science. We've already talked in great detail about the many meanings behind this aphorism in another video, so if you haven't yet, stop everything you're doing and watch that, then come back here, but not necessarily in that order. But what is God to Nietzsche? What exactly has died? Nietzsche describes God generally as, quote, the name for the realm of ideas and ideals, and specifically as, quote, the last, thinnest, emptiest concept, placed as the first, as cause in itself, as ens realissimum, or the realist being. So what has died is the realm of ideas, and more importantly, their influence on us. Philosopher Gilles Deleuze says of modern nihilism that it, quote, is no longer the devaluation of life in the name of higher values, but rather the devaluation of higher values themselves. Kant's continued reliance on eternal a priori concepts is a continuation of practical nihilism. But Kant goes further than any of his predecessor and help inaugurates a higher history than any history hitherto. There are phenomena, the mere appearance of things acquired by our imperfect senses and categorized by our limited, puny understanding, and the noumena, the thing in itself that is the true, objective actuality of a thing which we have no access to. When it comes to morality, Kant simply says we have a duty to be good, not to God or even ourselves, but to reason itself, the so-called categorical imperative. Kantian morality doesn't even provide us a reward for good behavior. Kant demands a complete excision from any bodily joy. If you enjoy doing good, well, it's not immoral, but it's also not moral, but amoral. You have to stand there with no emotion whatsoever and tell the Nazis there are Jews in your attic because reason dictates objectively that lying is wrong. The eternal forms of Plato could still be achieved by the wise philosopher king and through the Platonic love with teenage boys. Heaven was attainable to those that followed the ascetic ideals of Christianity. But with Kant, the horror of horrors is realized. The actual world, the real, is forever beyond our grasp. Even the empty promise of an afterlife has been taken away. We are forever trapped in the apparent world. But after over 2,500 years of degrading the sensual for the spiritual, it is a world which cannot bear the burden of objectivity. 20th century German philosopher Martin Heidegger said of nihilism, quote, "The supersensory is transformed into an unstable product of the sensory, and with such a debasement of its antithesis, the sensory denies its own essence. The deposing of the supersensory does away with the merely sensory and thus with the difference between the two. The deposing of the supersensory culminates in a neither nor in relation to the distinction between the sensory and the non-sensory. It culminates in meaninglessness. It remains nevertheless the unthought and invincible presupposition of its own blind attempts to extricate itself from meaninglessness through a mere assigning of sense and meaning." All of the transcendent values created by Socratic nihilism and cemented by Christianity have now been devalued. If objective truth and morality no longer exist, do we not live in absolute relativism, where truth and morality cease to have any meaning? For if all truths and values are equal, then they may as well be equally nothing. Fyodor Dostoevsky famously said, "If God is dead, then everything is permitted." If objective morality doesn't exist, how do we maintain that rape, pedophilia, torture, cannibalism, school shootings, terrorism, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth, are wrong or undesirable, that we ought not do them? Of course, everything is permitted with a living God as well.
Any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
My God. رعبا من شمالها إلى جنوبها ومن شرقها إلى غربها.
Modernity claims that all humans are equal, a notion which is profoundly Christian. Friedrich was famously anti-egalitarian. Egalitarianism, or the idea of equality, are deeply antithetical to Friedrich's philosophy. Unfortunately, his anti-egalitarianism has led many conservative and fascist groups openly embracing Nietzsche, despite him also being hostile to the modern state, nationalism, racism, and anti-Semitism. It's worth looking at Friedrich's critique of equality and perform a genealogy of the concept. As Cuck Philosophy said in his book on Nietzsche and Marx, quote, "Such a view, egalitarianism, emerged through a synthesis of Christianity, all individuals possessing a fundamentally equal soul that is independent of all particular properties and empirical circumstances, and capitalist ideology, all individuals being equal in their capacity as rights holders, contract signers, transactional agents." The presupposition of equality is that there are pre-made individuals that can exist absent of any social conditioning, which, to put it mildly, is a little silly. Liberal theory will state that all people in modern capitalist society have a right to equality of opportunity. However, there is no guarantee of equality of outcome. Yet, equality of opportunity and equality of outcome are self-perpetuating. Those individuals born into a wealthy alabaster families have greater access to opportunities than their impoverished peers, and because of that greater access to opportunity have better outcomes. In reality, individuals only exist because they are constructed out of society, something the vulgar objectivists, those sycophantic followers of Ayn Rand, seem unable to comprehend. With the death of God, humans themselves must take God's place as the creator of values. Humanity itself is viewed as an end. This is not inherently bad, as this entire time humans always were the ones who created values. But it becomes a problem when humanity itself is viewed as an end, as a finished project, as a ready-made ideal. We've revealed the finale of history, of civilization. There's nothing left to do. Zarathustra says, quote, "One still works, for work is a form of entertainment. But one is careful lest entertainment be too harrowing. One no longer becomes poor or rich, both require too much exertion. Who still wants to rule? Who obey? Both require too much exertion. No shepherd in one herd. Everybody wants the same. Everybody is the same. Friedrich's fear of theoretical nihilism is not that everything is permitted, but that nothing will be done, nothing will be overcome. Humanity does not want to create or affirm new values. Everywhere theoretical nihilism repeats the same. With sameness, mediocrity, and passivity, the last person appears, not the last man, because #feminism. The last person says we have invented happiness, and nothing more needs to be done except think about this invention, this end, this goal. We have a goal in our modern nihilistic society, a certain goal shared by everyone. A spouse and a house with a mouse or more. The middle class, an American dream, provides a little mildness, peace, and kindliness in thought and action. The logic of the last person soothes and gives confidence in a world without meaning, and the last person's goal provide a, quote, certain warm, fear-dispelling narrowness, and imprisonment within optimistic horizons.
There is an inevitability that comes with the last person. If history is automatic, a foregone conclusion, then it doesn't require anyone to do anything. There is no need for action, for resistance, for fighting or defending. The intellectual horizons of the last person are defined only in terms of a shallow happiness of material comfort and spiritual complacency. Any type of suffering, unhappiness, discomfort, anything which might limit a person's will, might force them to overcome themselves, must be banished. The collapse of a foundationalist project means all goods are simply subjective preferences. Therefore, the only objective good is everyone is of equal worth. The only objective truth is all truths are equal. Egalitarianism is one of the main concepts wielded by the last person. Another of Friedrich's critique of egalitarianism is, if all values are equally nothing, if there is perfect equality in society, then there is nothing to overcome. Absolute or negative relativism reduces all values to nil, to zero. In the absurdist movie Fight Club, the unnamed narrator, a literal everyman who is no man, works for an unnamed automobile company. He inspects car accidents, events which are chaotic, tragic, and unique in their damage, in order to apply a simple mathematical equation. Is it worth it? Turns out, it usually isn't.
On a long enough timeline, the survival rate for everyone drops to 0. I was a recall coordinator. My job was to apply the formula.
Here's the infant went through the windshield. 3 points.
A new car built by my company leaves somewhere traveling at 60 miles per hour. The rear differential locks up.
The teenager's braces are wrapped around the backseat ashtray. Might make a good anti-smoking ad.
The car crashes and burns with everyone trapped inside. Now, should we initiate a recall?
The father must have been you. Did you see where the fat's burned to the seat? The polyester shirt? Very modern art.
Take the number of vehicles in the field, A, multiply it by the probable rate of failure, B, then multiply the result by the average out-of-court settlement, C. A times B times C equals X. If X is less than the cost of a recall, we don't do one.
Are there a lot of these kinds of accidents?
You wouldn't believe.
Which car company do you work for?
A major one.
Friedrich not only critiques liberalism, but capitalism as well. In The Gay Science, Friedrich says, quote, "The busiest of all ages, our age, does not know how to make anything out of its great diligence and wealth, except always more and more wealth, and more diligence, and more industriousness." In speaking about capitalists and the capitalist state, he says, quote, "Nowadays, the crudest and most evil forms, the egoism of the moneymakers and the military despots, hold sway over almost everything on earth. In the hands of these despots and moneymakers, the state certainly makes an attempt to organize everything anew of itself, and to bind and constrain all those mutually hostile forces. That is to say, it wants men to render it the same idolatry they formerly rendered the church. In describing the cultural effects of capitalism, he says in his untimely meditation, Schopenhauer as Educator, quote, "The greed of the moneymakers demands a speedy education so that one may quickly become a money-earning being, yet at the same time an education sufficiently thorough to enable one to earn a very great deal of money. And man is allowed only as much culture as it is in the interest of general money-making and world commerce he should possess. Today's education strives to make as many human beings as possible culturally bound to capitalism, to view capitalism as a natural, necessary, and moral system. Education is typically not viewed as an exploration of self and knowledge, but specifically as an investment towards some semblance of success within capitalism. In capitalism, all things become equal, not quantitatively, but qualitatively. Under capitalism, all things can be subjected to the ultimate axiom, exchange value. The value of everything can be reduced to an arbitrary exchange value for the purpose of creating more value. Humanity only finds value in the consumption of exchange value, which drives capitalism further. Capitalism begets more capitalism. While this may seem like the principle of the will to power, to continuously overcome itself by willing more, that Nietzsche so fervently espouses, it remains a reactive willing by humanity. We are not commanding, we are obeying this thing of our own creation, and we are doing so because this image of value, exchange value, claims it is the one, the true, the good, and so on and so forth. The unnamed narrator of Fight Club attempts to find novelty through capitalist consumption.
I'd like to order the Erica Picari dust ruffles.
If I saw something clever, like a little coffee table in the shape of a yin-yang, I had to have it. The Klipsk personal office unit, the Hovatrek home Exerbike, or the Yohanneshav sofa with the string green stripe pattern. Even the Rizlampa wire lamps of environmentally friendly unbleached paper. I'd flip through catalogs and wonder, what kind of dining set defines me as a person? I had it all. Even the glass dishes with tiny bubbles and imperfections, proof that they were crafted by the honest, simple, hard-working indigenous peoples of wherever.
But such a willing towards nothingness leaves him ill-constituted, for it is an endeavor which remains anti-life.
For 6 months, I couldn't sleep.
You can't die from insomnia.
What about narcolepsy? I nod off, I wake up in strange places, I have no idea how I got there.
You need to lighten up.
Can you please just give me something?
Red and blue 2 UnAlive lipstick, red Sacanals.
No. You need healthy, natural sleep. Choose some valerian root and get more exercise.
Hey, come on. I'm in pain.
The herd longs desperately for something stable in a meaningless and chaotic world. We find ourselves content with our gadgets and symbols, more than happy to replace them with near replicas. The herd that follows, for instance, the Apple logo, obeys the command of Apple. Obey the Apple. We will tell you when to overcome, how to adapt, what you like and don't like, what to believe. Friedrich says, quote, "Belief is always most desired, most pressingly needed when there is a lack of will. For the will as the emotion of command is a distinguishing characteristic of sovereignty and power. That is to say, the less a person knows how to command, the more urgent is his desire for that which commands and commands sternly. When a man arrives at the fundamental conviction that he requires to be commanded, he becomes a believer. Modernity, nihilism, capitalism, what have you, ultimately just creates a world which humanity can kneel to. Our contemporary world of algorithms control every aspect of our lives. Twitter and Facebook gives us feeds that it says we want to see. Amazon and Spotify have curated sections titled For You. It's FUBU, you see, for us, by us. All our decisions have already been made for us. Philosopher Liv Agar says it far better than I can.
One's social world, their political identity, their understanding of events, their sense of community, and their tastes in music are all provided to one by machines. Without these machines, we are nothing. The various attributes and virtues that describe what truly defines an individual are served to them on a platter by advanced systems of algorithms designed to turn them into perfect little consumers. This is combined with a perceived sense of choice, of course. You have 5 or 6 options to pick from the algorithmically determined set. One may tell themselves they have freedom, and by this I mean an effect on the world through actions and beliefs, and yet they have nothing. In this process, no level of originality is required. One simply begins consuming and then never has to stop. What other medium provides for better judgment of others' virtues than on the internet, where virtue is determined by a consumption pattern? It seems that more and more of our identity becomes entirely rendered by silicon.
Capitalism is the process of theoretical nihilism. Capitalism continuously replaces values, overcomes itself. Some do believe that the axioms of capitalism are in fact permanent, natural, and good. But for those that know better, their actual impermanence is the source of existential angst. We obey capitalism. Capitalism overcomes itself, but we do not overcome capitalism or ourselves. Values are overcome, but not our values, for capitalism constantly returns us towards the same, empty exchange value.
Your father was seduced by the dark side of the Force. He ceased to be Anakin Skywalker and became Darth Vader. When that happened, the good man who was your father was destroyed. So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
A certain point of view?
Luke, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view.
Throughout Nietzsche's works, nihilism seems to be given the value judgment of bad. It is an undesirable condition. Theoretical nihilism, the devaluation of the highest values, is certainly bad for the believers in a monotheistic deity like Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It also appears bad for the Enlightenment, to humanists, to metaphysicians, idealists, and most thinkers of modernity. All of these beliefs presuppose a kind of objectivity, but nihilism makes objectivity impossible. There are those that react resentfully to nihilism by becoming pessimists, like Arthur Schopenhauer. But Friedrich wants us to lean into nihilism, to affirm nihilism within ourselves, to accept that all values must be overcome eternally. Nietzsche's project is the eternally recurring revaluation of all values because the objective I is a myth. Quote, "Here it is always demanded that we think an I that cannot possibly be thought, an I that must not have any direction, in which the active and interpretative forces through which seeing first becomes seeing something are to be shut off, are to be absent. Objectivity is impossible. Subjectivity is necessary. Subjectivity throws us into relativism, but this isn't the negative relativism we spoke of earlier, where all truths and moral are equally true and valid, and therefore equally meaningless. This is a positive relativism, or what Friedrich calls perspectivism. We talked about perspectivism a little bit in this video on famous singer and convicted pedophile Robert Sylvester Kelly. Nietzsche's point here is there is no knowledge, no I, no objectivity that has no specific perspective. Any objectivity that amounts to a disinterested contemplation is both a non-concept and absurdity. All perspectives are finite and only show a limited view. Quote, "There is only a perspectival seeing, only a perspectival knowing." As literally everything Nietzsche, his perspectivism is based on the existential principle of the will to power. There are no equal wills. There are strong wills and weak wills, and similarly strong perspectives and weak perspectives. As we saw in the R. Kelly video, there is a battle between perspectives, and strong perspectives subsume weak perspectives, making weak perspectives obey the commands of the strong perspectives. Because there is no equality, there is nothing but difference. The world is meaningless until we apply meaning to it. The cosmos is, to all eternity, chaos, and the will to power grasps onto differences in order to preserve and enhance itself, in order to keep willing. The nihilists of Western civilization have been precisely this crushing of difference, of the world, and of life. Plato's forms crushed the difference of the sophists. Christianity crushed the difference of the seven devils, the heretic, the witch, the soothsayer, the fool, the doubter, the unholy one, and the villain. And modernity crushes the difference of the insane, the irrational, the hysteric, the savage, and so on. Friedrich doesn't want an I with no perspective, or only one perspective. He wants as many perspectives as possible. Quote, "The more affects we allow to speak about a matter, the more eyes, different eyes, we know how to bring to bear on one and the same matter. That much more complete will our concept of this matter, our objectivity, be. The absolute subjectivity that Friedrich demands is more objective than the most rational and pure of objectivities of modernity. The more perspectives we have at our disposal, the greater the chance we will find the correct solution to a current and temporary problem. Friedrich wants us to have, quote, the capacity to have one's pros and contras in one's own power, and to shift them in and out, so that one knows how to make precisely the difference in perspectives and affective interpretations useful for knowledge. If we continuously affirm a multiplicity of perspectives, only then does theoretical nihilism, the devaluation of the highest values, cease to be a problem for humanity. Instead, it is a source of great overcoming.
Zarathustra states, quote, "You must wish to consume yourself in your own flame. How could you wish to become new unless you had first become ashes? I love him who wants to create over and beyond himself and thus perishes. Thus spoke Zarathustra."
And only then does our villing cease to be a villing towards nothingness, and becomes villing which affirms existence.
I say unto you, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. I say unto you, you still have chaos in yourselves.
So, is there a point to existence? To getting out of bed? Well, yes, there's many points to existing, and many ways of getting out of bed, but you will never find them beyond this world, and you will never find eternal points that are unassailable. Your existence has meaning only if you are willing to embrace and affirm the differences inherent and primary in a world which is to all eternity chaos. We asked in the beginning if we are destined to be forgotten, and we asked it as if it was an undesirable outcome. But forgetfulness is not necessarily a bad thing. One needs to be able to forget in order to create the new. Every repetition is always a repetition of something new, unique, novel, but only if we're willing to accept each from a new, unique, novel perspective. But before you forget about me, I must not forget about my several patrons who use their mighty exchange value to reaffirm my existence. For as little as $2 a month, just $2 itty bitty dollars, you too can help produce the repetition of Strange Corners, with each nook and cranny and overcoming of the last. There is no strangest corner, but there are eternally stranger ones. Or don't, cause it doesn't fucking matter.
Lay it down, let me see your hand. Show me what you got. You're always talking, but you're not playing. It doesn't match your face. Gotta find my way away from this place. Can you take me now? I want it real. Are you afraid of me now? You afraid of me now? Do you feel it? Do you feel that I can see your soul? Do you feel it? Do you feel it? Do you feel the beating in your heart? I want it real. Run away with me now. I want it real. Run away from me now. Do you feel? Do you feel it? Do you feel that I can see your soul?
From a certain point of view.